Hey patrons and supporters, welcome to a new Behind the Score video. We're going to take a look at my recent work, Abstract in Geis, for solo guitar. And I wrote this piece to reflect the dismay I felt from the recent changes in American education and what I believe has been a wholesale promotion of student choice and freedom when it comes to making permanent and life-changing decisions that are ultimately harmful. Not just for the individual, but for the society as a whole. And so the spelling here of abstract in Geis, I was very intentional about the spelling. And maybe you can ask me sometime in person what I meant by that. But let's jump into the score. You'll see some of it pop up on the screen. This is a set of 4 etudes I wrote for my own guitar students. And the first movement is called Crucible. This movement starts with a 4-bar theme that traces a line from the low range of the guitar to the high range. It's complete, almost perfectly balanced. I think of it sort of as symbolizing the student in his early innocence. And this theme appears 4 times in the movement, undergoing a few changes, especially during the second and third appearances. Here in the second appearance, you can see at the very end of the phrase, I changed it by reverting to a dissonant chord on the low end of the guitar. It creates a cool effect, I think, a sort of deceptive cadence, as if it just kind of flips everything upside down at the very end, as if the student has encountered some sort of disappointment in life for the first time. And in the third instance of this theme, it gets transposed down into the bass range, which significantly alters the character. I wanted to express some of the bitterness a student feels when it's hard to understand why things in life just aren't going right. And I really love the texture that is created by inverting this to the bass. Along with the trills up in the higher register, I took those and I flipped those upside down as well, put those in the bass. I just really like the texture that's created by the harmonics floating over top of the trills, and thought it'd be a really simple idea just to flesh out this movement and make it out of 2 ideas, essentially. And I developed those 2 ideas just by altering their ranges from treble to bass. And I think this helps the entire movement feel coherent, but also the sound world sort of gets widened by moving around the guitar so much. So I was pretty satisfied with this first movement. The second movement, Introspectional, I intended to be a study in timbre and static form. I didn't really want it to sound like it was going anywhere in this movement, but I also had to avoid the trap of sounding too repetitive. So I think the scratching technique really helps give the movement a feeling of moving forward without ever arriving somewhere new. I meant for this movement to reflect those moments a student finds himself bewildered and confused, feeling like no one understands him, but this bitter introspection gets interrupted. The strums at the nut were added as a joke by me. When I first showed this technique to my guitar students, they were on the floor laughing. They couldn't believe you could make this wonderful sound on the guitar. And to this day, they still giggle anytime that I throw that piece in somewhere, or throw that technique in somewhere. So I decided I had to throw it into the piece here. And this very serious, somber introspection gets interrupted by that childlike humor. The third movement, the silence in a sacrifice, even though each etude was intended to be an abstract, all four etudes kind of follow a sonata form. You have the first movement that gives you a theme like a sonata movement. You have the second movement that is slow. And now you have the third movement, which is a dance movement. And then, of course, the fourth movement is the big finale. So I wanted the third movement to start off as a sort of danse macabre that later liquefies into a distorted and abstracted frame of itself. A surrealist reimagining of the dance movement, if you will. This is certainly the most abstracted out of the four movements. And at the start, you can see these bouncy glissandi in triple meter, accenting on upbeats to suggest the dance effect. And this gets developed in the second phrase, and then thickened in the third. But before you know it, it's already giving way to the liquidation, where it deteriorates. And this is where the student's kind of faced with the task of dwelling in a single sound world, just on one chord, listening to the profundity of each individual note clashing with the others. It's something you can really only understand if you're behind the instrument, feeling these conflicting vibrations beating against your chest. And I wanted to exaggerate this phenomenon to help students recognize this tactile aspect and its importance when you're playing classical guitar. So in the third movement, if we follow the narrative, this is also kind of the time when our student has started to take matters in his own hands, but he's unguided. He hasn't been shown the way. And so in the fourth movement, inevitably, a crisis emerges. The fourth movement, the rapid movement, borrows a lot of rhythms from Piazzolla's tangos, but it's also unified by this opening motif. Ti-ta-ta-ta-boom, boom, boom. I take this little motif and it's just everywhere, all throughout this last movement. I even transpose it down into the bass section. Ti-ta-ti-dum, boom, boom. Kind of like how I developed material in the first movement. Kind of drawing that connection between the first movement and the fourth movement. Of course, I couldn't resist giving my students the chance to go out with a bang. I thought a few raschiatos and a long 16th note run should do the trick. And it's kind of tricky to accent all the slurs properly, so make sure if you're practicing this piece to use a metronome on those. And hopefully this video gives you guys a little insight into the score. and my approach to writing the piece. I had a pretty short deadline to write these pieces, less than a week in fact, so that was a crazy time. But I think they turned out well. Comment below, let me know what you think. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel by clicking the bell below. And if you want to hear this piece in its entirety, Abstract in Guise, you can watch the official video on my YouTube channel. Just search Edwin Culver, Abstract in Guise. Or soon, you'll be able to listen to it on Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, etc. And if you are a classical guitarist interested in purchasing the score for yourself or your students, feel free to send me a direct message and we'll get that taken care of for you. And lastly, but most importantly, thanks so much to my patrons for supporting new music and my music specifically. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, be sure to check out www.patreon.com/EdwinCulver for all the latest music history videos and behind-the-scenes posts, material that is early released, autographed scores, all sorts of things that I've cooked up just for you guys. And so again, this is all made possible by my patrons. So thanks guys, until next time, stay musical.